Okay, so today we're going to look at compressors. This is part of the National 5 Music Tech revision with the exam currently on the 11th of May. So compressors, what do they do? What are they for? How do you use them? So a compressor is, the purpose of it, the purpose of it is to squash the volume of certain parts of your recording. So when you're recording a sound, chances are there's going to be some loud sounds, some quiet sounds. In most things you record, there's going to be a mixture. And what a compressor does, it'll just target just the loud sounds and reduce the volume of those a little bit. So it won't do anything to the quieter sounds. It'll just target the loud sounds. So that means that the quieter sounds and the kind of medium loud sounds have a chance to come through a little bit more. So it can help to make your audio a little bit more compact, maybe a little bit friendlier to listen to. It can help give a bass line, for example, a little bit more punch and a little bit more energy. And you can control how much that particular sound is coming through in your mix. Maybe you want it to punch through a lot more, and you compress the sound and then use the makeup gain to allow it to punch through a little bit more. Or maybe you don't want it to interfere too much. So maybe your bass line has certain bits which interfere with the rest of the recording. So you might want to squash those bits down using your compressor. Now there are two kind of main controls in the compressor. You've got the threshold and the ratio that are your two main controls that you adjust. So if we look at this graph here, we've got the input level, which is how loud your signal is measured in decibels, and your output level. So this is essentially your signal strength before it goes into the compressor and then after it leaves the compressor. So the threshold, you can see that the threshold is this line here. So as you increase the amount of input level, obviously once the sound goes above your threshold, your compressor is going to kick in and it's going to start squashing the sound down. So with the threshold set at this line here, once the input goes above that volume there, whatever, we obviously can't see on this graph, but whatever that volume is, you can see that the angle immediately changes, and whereas it would be continue up to get louder and louder and louder and louder, it's actually squashing it down. It's actually squashing it down even further. So these volumes here are completely untouched, not interfered with at all, but anything above the threshold is what is affected. So you can set the threshold. Maybe you want some of the loud sounds to come through, so you can move that line a little bit further to the right-hand side, and maybe it'll be these bits over here that are compressed, or maybe you want to move it even further to the left and have an even more consistent volume by compressing the whole signal. So that's threshold. The ratio is the other main control, and the ratio, you can see these, we've got different ratios on the right hand side here. So 1:1 means this is exactly the same as the ratios or the gradients rather that you do on a graph in maths. So you can see that a 1:1 means that as the input level increases, so does the output level, and that would be the same as having no compressor at all. You just have a line going straight up. 2:1 means that for every decibel, the input level, for every for every 2 decibels the input level increases, the output level is going to be squashed down by 1 decibel. So you can see that for 2 squares, the input level has gone up, the output level has only gone up 1. For 4 squares, the input level increases, the output has only increased 2. So it's squashing it down at a ratio of 2:1. 4:1 means that you'd have to go up 4 squares on input level, and that would only go up 1 square on output level, so it's squashing it down at a rate of 4:1. Or this last line here, which means that essentially that the volume cannot get any higher than that. So your input level, it can get higher and higher and higher and higher. The output level is not going to get any higher. So whatever that decibel number is there, it's not going to exceed that at all. Attack and release. Now these are, I guess, arguably slightly less important controls for your compressor, but they're still, if you're a professional sound engineer, you'd still certainly use them a lot. Now attack and release, very simply, are how quickly your compressor jumps into action. You don't always necessarily want your compressor to start compressing immediately. Sometimes you want it to have just a little bit of a gap between the sound happening and the actual compression happening. So on this graph here, you've got 0 dB here, and then your sound starts up to plus 9 dB. Now this sound engineer has obviously decided that plus 9 dB is far too loud and it needs squashing down a little bit. So this blue line is what your signal would look like. Now the compressor has decided that it's going to squash it down to plus 6, so it's reduced it by 3 decibels. So you've got your numbers on the left-hand side here. So it would be at plus 9, our blue line. The compressor is squashing it down to plus 6, but this grey bar here, this is the attack phase, and this is the length of time that the compressor takes to act. So if you have your compressor acting immediately, it can sound a little bit clipped, a little bit stilted. It doesn't necessarily produce a nice sound. Then we've got the release phase, which is the exact same principle, just at the end of the sound. So after the signal goes back down below the threshold, how long does it take for your compressor to turn off? So your attack and release will adjust how harsh the compressor is, how quickly it starts to act, and how quickly it lets go after the noise has gone back down below the threshold. So they're very, very important, can really affect how the compressor sounds. So usually measured in milliseconds, which are thousandths of a second. Last bit that you need to know about settings on a compressor, we've got that's known as the knee, and it's essentially either a hard knee or a soft knee. So if we look back at, let's just go back a little bit there. This is the exact same graph there. Where we are, there we go. Okay, so the threshold is that line there. We've got the input level and the output level exactly the same on the graph as the graph on the first slide. So the knee is either a hard knee or a soft knee. So it's obviously named after a knee joint. So your hard knee is like a bent leg with an axis or a pivot just there, whereas a soft knee is more like a gradual curve. So with a hard knee, this is going to be a very definite, right, that's the threshold, now your compressor's kicking in, whereas a soft knee means that there's actually kind of like a gradual increase in the amount that the compressor starts to compress. It's much more gradual, so it's much less noticeable, a little bit kind of softer. So soft knee makes compressor action more subtle and less aggressive. So it's a slower increase of compression ratio. So it's like the ratio is gradually getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it gets to whatever the ratio is set at for that angle there. So especially useful for high ratios where compression will be more noticeable. So if you have a hard knee with a very high ratio, you can really kind of hear where that compressor is kicking in, which isn't always the kind of sound that you want. Right, okay, so let's actually have a look at a compressor in Logic. So this is a quick series of loops that I've set up. Now you won't really be able to hear that fantastically because this has been played out of my laptop speakers and into the microphone. So we've not got brilliant sound quality, but we'll be able to demonstrate it nonetheless. So this is what it sounds like, he says. Right, let's try that again. Sorry, I should have actually muted this one. Right, okay, so it's the bass line that we're going to focus on. This is our bass line. Okay, so we can see that that's quite a kind of aggressive bass line. There's plenty of signal level there. We can see that we've got it's a stereo signal, obviously, which is why we've got two that are exactly the same. One is for the left and one is for the right. So what we've done, we've put a compressor on this track. Now this is our compressor here, and you can see at the bottom you've got your adjustments. So we've got threshold here, which is set to -21. We've got the ratio here, which is set to, I don't know, somewhere around 11, almost 12. Makeup gain is actually at -1, so it's not really increasing the volume. Knee, attack, and release. Okay, so these are our 6 controls which we've just talked about in that PowerPoint. Now, you can have a look at this graph here. As I adjust the threshold, you can start to see that graph starts to shift to the left, and that's it starting to kick in earlier. Ratio, you can start to see that starts to flatten out. Let me just bring the threshold down a bit and do that again. So if I increase the ratio, you can start to see that that's going more or less aggressive. Makeup gain increases or lowers the gain depending on what you want to do. Knee, so hard knee, you can see that knee area there has gone very, very pointy, or soft knee where it's rounded out and then attack or release, you can't see how that affects it in the graph there, but that's just obviously how quickly or slowly it will kick into action. Right, so last thing I'm going to show you, so that's what it looks like there. We can do compressor off, and then I'm going to turn it on. And you can see it starting to act there. Now these actually look really similar levels because I've got the makeup gain turned up a little bit. I'm going to turn that down, bring the threshold down so that starts to kick into action a bit more, turn the ratio up a little bit, bring that knee back down. There we go. So it's not really doing very much at the moment. But it is compressing the signal, as we can see from that graph there. Anyway, right, okay. So comparing our normal signal with a compressed signal, I'm going to unmute this one now and have a look. So this is our original signal. This is what it looks like. This is the signal, what it looks like after it's compressed. So it's still the same shape. It's just, so there we go, original signal, compressed signal. It's still the same shape, but it's just the loud sounds that have been cut down. So if you have a look at this area in particular, you can see it nice and clearly there. So have a look at that shape and then keep looking at that as we change it. You can see that the very start of it isn't really affected. It's just mainly the louder bits which are kind of cut down. So the start of it's still quite loud. It's mainly just the louder bits which are really brought down quite a long way. It's also changed the shape of the start of each note as well. So it's much more like a kind of bell shape now. Anyway, right, so that's the compressor. That's what it does. That's how it works.